second webinar. And today we have Ken McCarthy, who is going to be talking to us about the new workplace, the temporary workplace that we're all kind of dealing with right now, maintaining the healthy workplace under the new physical and social distancing protocols. So, you know, we're not finding new ways to interact with our employees and as groups, just like we are right now. And, you know, all of the challenges that are obvious and some that are maybe less obvious that we're now faced with that we probably didn't used to have to think about. So those are providing business owners with new risks in terms of things like employee harassment, violence, and fraud. And Ken, who is a member of the BIA, he's with Integrity by McCarthy, Inc. He's going to share with us his insights and lead a discussion on risks that business owners face in the new environment, what can be done now to mitigate the risks, and how businesses can set the stage for a successful return to the new normal. And the new normal, I think in a lot of cases, even when we get back to opening our doors and to our stores and our offices, a lot more business is going to be conducted probably virtually, especially in terms of team staffing, that sort of thing, communication. So a lot of this we can carry forward with us as things start to reopen. How we're going to work this webinar is Ken's going to share, he's going to talk a bit about what he's going to talk about. He's going to share his presentation from his screen. The chat is open, as I mentioned earlier. At the bottom, if you click on chat, it should open up a little panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can add to the chat, or you can answer people, you can ask questions. If you click on participants, it also will show you on your right hand, that same right-hand panel of the list of everybody else that's on the call. And you also can mute yourself there, and you can also raise your hand. So if someone else is speaking and you want to contribute to the discussion, please feel free to use that raise hand button. If you are not familiar with Zoom, definitely do not feel like you can't participate. Just kind of give us a SOS wave, and we'll invite you to participate for sure. How Ken would like to present the content today is more of an interactive style discussion. So do feel free to ask questions, raise your hand throughout the presentation, or ask a question in the chat, and we will address it at the time rather than wait until the end for a sort of formal Q&A session, which we will do at the end, but do feel free to ask questions as he moves forward with his presentation. So Ken, I will hand this over to you and mute myself here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrea. Good afternoon, everybody. So like most of us or all of us, I'm also relatively new to this Zoom world. I learned a term called Zoom anxiety, which I'll share with you a little bit later in this presentation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend some time talking to you, and I'm also going to be sharing a few slides with you. I did one of these webinars yesterday with a different group, and we're going to be touching on most of the same subject matter today, with a few little bonus pieces in there, if I could say that. I've done lots of presentations in my life, lots and lots of interactive sessions, and I found that doing the webinar one is really, really difficult because I'm dealing with, you know, the glare on the glasses, and I'm one who likes to move around a lot during my presentations and walk amongst the crowd. So you may see me kind of bouncing around. I was looking at the video from yesterday and kind of chuckling at myself, but we'll get through this for sure. All right, so some of you have heard the story already, some have not. We came up with this idea, or I came up with this idea to volunteer to come forward and share my insights with this particular group and with other groups just a handful of weeks ago when we're just entering the world of physical and social distancing. So you got this new world now where all of a sudden there's a lot more remote work and virtual work, people working from home. And I've had the benefit of having 6 adults in the house with me here during these past 7 weeks. And it's a mixed blessing sort of thing in that, you know, we're there for one another, which is absolutely wonderful. We oftentimes will retreat to different parts of the room, and I sometimes find myself having to fight for um, tight bandwidth on the internet. But anyways, but the neat thing about having this exposure to the adult family members, some of whom are working remotely, is we've had a good chance to see some of the real life things that are happening in workplaces that are no longer in buildings downtown or whatever, but but via the internet with colleagues. And we kind of coined the phrase, harassment is still harassment over a video call. And I started to explore a little bit, talking to a number of people on some of the things that we've seen during these Zoom type calls, and not exclusive to Zoom, but other sorts of video calls. Sometimes they're funny, and we've all seen like the videos on the Zoom fails and those sorts of things. But I'm also seeing something that's actually troubling me quite a bit, and where in this new world, this new environment, you're seeing coworkers who in the past would, just give each other hello passing by in the hallway at work, talking, interacting with one another, sometimes the camera being in somebody's bedroom with things in the background. And it's really changed the way we're interacting. And I've seen it's also caused some people, a number of factors cause this, and I'll talk about it shortly, but it's caused some people to cross the line and start making inappropriate comments that, in my view, actually fall within the federal or provincial definitions of harassment and violence in the workplace. So today, I'm going to talk to you about what I've observed. I'm going to share with you, actually, I'll just flip, I'll show you the outline here in just a minute. I'm just going to share the page for just a split second here, just about what we're going to talk about today. Of course, I've got like 10 pages open. Okay. So this is just an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We've seen in this new world of social and physical distancing, businesses responding to, having to come up with a new way of doing business. And I've been quite impressed with what I've seen. And Andrea, kudos to you and your team for the weekly sessions that the Barrhaven Business Improvement Area has been doing for local businesses. I'm not going to mention names, but there's a specific business on the call recently, and I'd heard them on a call before. And the conversation really went, and the tone really went from this is doom and gloom to this is how I'm making money now. And this was a transition over a number of weeks. And I heard that on a recent call, and I have to say, I was really impressed. And I think part of it is that individual business signing into your group's calls, signing into other calls, and getting a sense of we have to respond in some way, shape, or form other than just close our doors and hope this goes away. I'm going to talk to you about what I think business leaders should be thinking about right now. We've created this wonderful, creative way of doing business. It's not a new way of doing business, the video and remote, the virtual remote, but it's different for a lot of people. We went into this with good intentions, and I'm seeing now that there are some consequences, negative sort of effects from this that I'll talk about as well. I'm going to give you some specific examples of things that I've seen that are crossing the line or close to crossing the line in terms of harassment, violence in the workplace. We're going to talk about the new drivers. Like these particular risks existed before COVID-19. There's harassment, there's violence, there's wrongdoing and fraud, but there's new risk drivers in this environment right now that we'll touch on. I'm going to spend a few minutes on a couple of things that I love talking about: the fraud triangle, the concept of insider threat, and then also corruption and what the bad guys, what criminals will do to actually corrupt employees. And oftentimes people will think, if I'm owning a small restaurant or shop in Barrhaven, am I really of value to organized crime or whatnot? Well, you may be in possession of credit card information or protected client information that somebody would be willing to pay for to exploit, steal identities, etc. So we're not immune from it. I'll talk about the do's and don'ts, things that business leaders should not be doing right now. I'll talk about what business leaders should be doing, and then I'll just provide you some closing remarks. I'm just going to get out of the screen here. Okay, you're still able to hear me okay? Yes, okay, thanks, excellent. Okay, so as Andrea said at the beginning of this conversation as well, I'm hoping to the extent possible that this can be interactive. So I told you about the types of presentations and sessions I've done in the past, where I'm moving around and engaging people and talking to them at tables and that sort of stuff. Not as easy in this sort of conversation, but I find every time I do one of these things, I love to hear the perspectives of other people, in the room or virtually in this manner. So if you have ideas, if you've experienced something, if you want to call me out on something you disagree with, please step in. Oh, I see Diane's comment on the audio being scratchy. I apologize. Um, I'll do my best to make it clear if I can. Um, so I'm inviting you to write on the chat, or raise your hand, as Andrea said as well, to try to get to offer your perspectives on things. So we've seen businesses come up with very creative ways of doing business now, and even reinventing themselves over the past 7 weeks with the pandemic. We've seen business owners creatively enable their employees to work remotely, so to work from home or virtually through social media platforms. Business owners have sent tools home to their employees. So I'd heard of situations where laptops and cell phones and other sorts of things have been sent to employees to allow them to continue to work for the business. We've adjusted operations in terms of physical distancing and safety controls in some places. Some businesses had to lay off employees, made that tough business decision. Minimal number of employees in an environment of locked doors and curbside delivery exists now. Some discontinued operations altogether. As I said, many reinvented themselves, and a lot of employers are showing to be very genuinely interested in their staff by doing mental health checks, or just connecting with their staff to do business through social media and other means, so virtual calls, happy hour calls, mental health check-ins. And so a lot of really, really creative things, really smart things that employers, that business owners have been doing to keep things going. Any comments or questions at this point? Does anybody have any other examples of some creative or unique things that people have done? And if not, no worries, I can continue on, but just take a pause here. Okay, I'll continue, but don't hesitate to step in. Okay. Let's talk about now what business leaders should be thinking about. So as I said, we created an environment here. Well, we had to work within a particular set of circumstances, something that was thrown upon us, the pandemic, and now we had to deal with it, and we came up with really good ways of dealing with it. So things that I challenge business leaders to think about right now is things such as, are you operating right now with a concrete plan, business continuity plan, or are you just simply surviving? And I'm going to guess most are just simply surviving. A lot of people put together, a lot of organizations put together the business continuity and resumption plans, but oftentimes that's a checklist sort of item. Some businesses don't necessarily exercise the plans, and when they come into these situations, they may not be as prepared as they want to. And there's all sorts of factors that will throw a monkey wrench into the plans. But I'm guessing, so a lot of us are just simply surviving. So many of the workplace risks that pre-existed COVID-19, and I'm going to talk about, the people interaction risks, so harassment, violence, they didn't simply disappear when social and physical distancing kicked in. They still exist. There's ways that these things can happen. Business leaders no longer can see all of the human interactions that are going on between their employees and also with their clients. Whether they could before, in their restaurants or stores, whatnot, it's more difficult now. They're not seeing what's going on, and they're trusting that people are doing what they need to do. Business leaders need to recognize that if your employees are still working for you, even if they're not standing in front of you in your workplace, you still have responsibilities to protect them from a workplace safety and health perspective. Those things didn't go away, okay? If you've authorized them to use certain tools and techniques, video conferencing as example, document sharing platforms, you need to be ready to deal with the consequences of those decisions. So those tools are great, and they're allowing you to continue doing what you need to do. Additionally, though, there's some consequences to that. So business leaders need to be mindful of that. If your employees have been laid off and you're hoping to bring them back, how you act now will determine how they respond. And in a call yesterday, Andrea had told us about an excellent webinar that you had attended, Andrea, participated in from BDO, which actually talks a lot about that. So I encourage people to look into that. And Andrea, afterwards, if you want to touch on that, that's great. We can't believe, so business leaders can't let their guard down and believe that COVID-19 has improved professional conduct and integrity in the workplace. And here I'm not picking on employees, it's everybody, but we can't assume, like I said earlier, that since we're no longer doing the business in the fashion that we did before, doesn't mean that things, that things went away. And a number of avoidable incidents are showing up on the radar, okay, which I'll talk about momentarily. Just at this point, I mentioned to you, I told you what I think business leaders should be thinking about. Any reactions or questions anyone wants to throw in at this point? Okay, well, I'll continue, and don't hesitate at any point. Just giving you that opportunity here. All right, so I'm going to share a screen now, and I'll go back to something I said a short while ago about Zoom anxiety. So there's a few faces I see on the call here, and some of you have already heard me talk about this. With a show of hands or whatnot, have some of you heard about Zoom anxiety? And it's not exclusive to Zoom. So Linda, yes. Okay. So it's an interesting concept, and I think I've actually experienced it. I think most of us experience it. So about a week and a half ago, I was watching late night news, and I saw a really interesting report on a professor at a Stanford University in California, a gentleman named Jeremy Bailenson. And he's the founder of this human virtual interaction lab. And the story was that these sorts of interactions, so it's not just Zoom, but these sorts of video interactions where you are staring at the screen and you're staring at your own face or someone else's face and everybody's looking at you at the whole time, they cause a great deal of anxiety. You're not in a boardroom where you can take advantage of someone looking away to do whatever. But these are really tough. They're anxiety that cause a lot of angst, and it's fascinating. And I'd say I've actually experienced some of it too. That's why I'm introducing some slides here, so you're not staring at my big face here the whole time. All right, so what I'm going to do now is, I mentioned earlier that I have seen some examples of crossing the line, or almost crossing the line, in this new way of doing business in this virtual world. And as I said earlier, we've seen the Zoom memes, and we've seen the Zoom fails and other sorts of video call fails on YouTube and that sort of stuff. And sometimes it's comical, but sometimes it's just crossing a line. So I'm going to share the screen again, and we'll just take a look at my next slide here. Okay, so just acknowledgement, Crystal, Dawn, or Andrea, you've got the screen up there that says specific examples? Okay, perfect, thank you very much. All right, so these are real examples that people have told me about. I've done a bit of research on some of the things that are happening, and someone may have a reaction that well, people are being overly sensitive or whatnot. It all depends on the work context and work environment. So a couple of sort of interesting examples I've heard, comments on, and I'll use my name in here, but holy crap, Ken, you sure gained a lot of weight over the past few weeks during the quarantine. Depending on the relationship you have with the person, and you're saying that in front of a number of other people, I'm going to guess that probably the recipient of that particular comment was probably feeling a little humiliated, embarrassed, and that actually takes you into the world of harassment, right? Or commenting on someone's real hair color, and so there's jokes like that on all over the internet. But it's interesting. These sorts of things are said, and there's a lot of stressors involved that are causing these sorts of things that I've touched on. I will touch on a little bit more as well. Commenting on what an individual is eating or how they're eating it, there's a sexual undertone there. Private messaging coworkers. So, through forums, video forums such as Zoom, the one we're using today, all of us have that opportunity to enter the chat room and provide our comments. And there's also a functionality where you can send a private message to somebody else. So I've learned recently that the host administrator of a Zoom call, so in this case with the BIA, everything that's captured in that chat, be it the chat for everyone or the private messaging, is compiled and retained for the organizers. So I'm aware of situations where private messaging comment from one individual to another individual, flirting, flattering, whatever, things that were not necessarily happening in a face-to-face work interaction are all of a sudden happening in this new world, which is kind of strange. Unwelcome comments. Making inappropriate comments to or about other people through the file sharing interface. So some people are using a tool called Slack to share documents and share tools, and sometimes a little bit unnecessary commentary, or of course during the video platform calls. And sometimes people forget that their volume is not on. Whether it's on or not on, you should not be doing this. So I've been in the business for a number of years on trying to figure out people, and I haven't quite figured it out, but I'm quite fascinated as to why people get in trouble and how they get in trouble, that sort of thing. And I think of bullying and harassment, and I take a look at my 4-year-old grandson at his preschool, and I take a look at my 85-year-old mother at her retirement home, and you know what? I see situations of harassment in the 4-year-old level and the 85-year-old level. Gossiping, chatting, mobbing, isolating, it happens everywhere. It happens with human beings repeatedly. It happens on these calls, right? I've seen heard of situations of people wearing inappropriate, offensive, or no clothing at all during a call. So they forget the cameras on, they're walking around in underwear. Okay, so you could laugh at that, kind of silly. There's a humiliation factor attached to that as well. And if I'm talking about the embarrassment factor, what sort of commentary and teasing goes on after the fact, and might you actually see people crossing the line into harassment in the workplace with this sort of thing when they start laughing? The offensive stuff as well. We're in an environment now where, as I mentioned earlier, you've got people sometimes doing these calls in their bedrooms because they don't have any other room in the house, or that's the quietest room in the house. They're opening their worlds, they're opening their lives to their coworkers, to something that the coworkers have never seen before. And so there's all sorts of opportunities for inappropriate comments, and also opportunities for the person who's opened their room to kind of be offensive to others as well. Inappropriate or offensive books in the background, paraphernalia. There's things that somebody could be doing in their private world here, which is very different from their personal world, that could be causing grief and stress to somebody else. I heard on a call yesterday the concept of a pajama party business call on Zoom. And the individual shared it with me. They didn't say that they were, that they were feeling harassed by it or anything else, but they did say this was really inappropriate in terms of how businesses and how professionals should be conducting themselves. And we've all seen fundraising campaigns, United Way, that sort of thing, where you pay some money to wear jeans to work or whatever. Different sort of world there. I've heard of the virtual happy hours. I've heard of situations of people seeing their bosses in a different sort of context, having a drink, drinking maybe a little bit to excess, saying some inappropriate things. Guards are down. It's a casual sort of environment. Business leaders certainly could lose a whole bunch of respect of your staff if you're no longer, portraying, a professional image. Zoom bombing. So we've heard of Zoom bombing. So this is where somebody hijacks a video call, such as this type of call, and coming in with racist or pornographic or whatever sort of content. And it's quite interesting because this isn't a situation of one employee to another employee in the same work environment, harassing. This is someone coming in from the outside. So I say to you as business leaders, very creatively and very cleverly, you've enabled staff to, work from home, work remotely using tools like this. There's a due diligence aspect there. You need to make sure you're protecting your employees to the extent that you can. There's a legal obligation to do it. And the whole concept of the Zoom bomb, and let's imagine that we're doing this call right now and somebody comes in and Zoom bombs with something really offensive. That actually could cause psychological harm to an individual. Depends on what the message is, right? So that sort of thing falls within both the federal and provincial definitions of violence in the workplace, and harassment as well. So these are just a few examples that I have personally talked to people about. I'm curious now. I'm gonna stop this sharing for a second here, and just take a quick pause here to see if anyone else has anything that they've witnessed or want to share. I'm taking a look at. Oh yeah, Jason McDonald said 3-year-old and 5-year-old have harassment mastered. Yeah, I know. I totally get that for sure. I hear Melanie Chapman's got a few comments there on the COVID snacks, I guess, for the weight gain. So anyways, just quickly here, anyone have anything to offer that I hadn't talked about? So things that you've seen personally?
Hi, it's Judy Collin. I'm with Precision Gymnastics.
Hi, Judy.
Hi. So one thing that we ended up doing, sorry for the background noise, is we started with a private cyber insurance policy, because we have to do a bit of online. We've taken the chat off with our children, but we have to do a bit of online instruction with our competitive participants, and we did go ahead and do a cyber insurance. Yes. So that's just one suggestion I would give.
You know what? That is fantastic. You're the first person to have mentioned that to me. Not that I've discussed this extensively, but I'm talking here about risks that business owners face. When we've allowed things to happen, and we made them happen for really good reasons. And the idea of the business insurance there is really, really smart. I commend you for that. I don't know if everyone has thought of that, but I think that's really smart. Okay, so thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the risk drivers. So, these risks, and I probably should have reversed the order of those slides, but these risks that we're facing now, harassment, violence in the workplace, wrongdoing, and fraud, which I haven't talked about just yet, these existed before. As I said, just COVID-19 didn't make them go away, right? So here's some of the drivers, from my perspective as to why we're at a greater risk right now. So I talked earlier about, business continuity, business resumption plans, and chances are a lot of us are just simply surviving as opposed to operating with a beautiful plan. One of the drivers is, I think, as I said, a lot of us just jumped into this without an actual concrete emergency or business continuity plan. We're seeing a lack of, and I'm going to guess as well, there's a lack of really concrete, well-articulated telework or working from home policies. How far does the employer protection reach? When does the employer not have an obligation to ensure the health and safety of an employee when they're working for them from home? Departure from workplace formality, I talked about that already. So we've got video calls in the bedroom. There's people wearing loungewear. They're opening their worlds to people that they probably not have opened their worlds to in some cases, to the same extent in the past. So all of a sudden they're doing this now. Lack of business owner or manager presence in the workplace, which I talked about. Something that's worrying me, and I haven't seen any concrete examples of it yet, but you've got fewer employees in a workplace. I'm thinking of a curbside sort of environment right now. Fewer sets of eyes. So is there the possibility that you may see an incident of workplace harassment or violence taking place when others aren't around? And there's the whole concept of integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's looking. I haven't seen examples of it. I'm hoping there aren't examples of it. It can happen before, outside of a COVID world. But my fear is, that sort of environment, there could be different risks for sure. Standard controls, so we can't control from an audit perspective theft and fraud in the workplace virtually. It's difficult. Certainly there's audit trails and the whole concept of following the money, but it's more challenging for sure. COVID-19 stress is, in my view, a risk driver for why, these pre-existing risks are elevated right now. So we've got, financial risks, family health, fear of the future, right? I'm thinking as well that we are mourning, so we're grieving the loss of the normal. I know I am personally. This is tough. Shock, denial, pain, guilt. Why can't I go outside and do the things I want to do? I know why I can't, but I'm not able to do that. It causes a lot of grief for sure. I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there's basic physiological and security needs like a roof over my head and able to feed myself. And I'm in the good fortunate situation that those worries aren't present for me, but they are for a lot of people, right? These things are in jeopardy. Psychological needs of belonging and interacting socially with people. We're not able to do things the way we wanted to and the way we did it before. And self-fulfillment needs are completely off the table. I talked about the anxiety producing, video calls as an example. And I'm worrying and I'm thinking about, coming out of this and entering the new normal. A theme that this particular group has talked about through the Barhaven BIA and other groups is a business assumption plan. We should be planning to our return to the work, to a new normal. To what extent have people done that? To what extent are people actually focusing time and effort on doing that right now? So I think that's why we're in a riskier sort of situation right now. Any questions at this point from anybody, or any comments I'd like to offer? I've got lots of material, so no worries. Okay, so I'm going to take you to one of the models that I quite enjoy talking about, and that's called the fraud triangle. So I'll just bring it up on the screen here. Okay, so Crystal, Don, Andrea, just quick confirmation, you see the fraud triangle there? Okay, great, thanks. Have people seen this before? Familiar with it? A handful of people. Okay, so this is not my brainchild by any means, but it's quite fascinating, and I quite like talking about it, and I find it very applicable. And so a lot of people will think of fraud oftentimes just in terms of a financial thing, but it's bigger than that. I'm looking at the top right side of the presentation slide, and it's talking about fraud being the use of one's occupation for personal enrichment through deliberate misuse or misapplication of organizations' resources and assets. And that's a definition that comes from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. And that's one definition. It works. It's more than financial. I like to describe it as an intentional act to secure unfair or unlawful action. Typical examples of fraud are asset misappropriation, financial statements, or records and corruption. So I've talked a lot about this model with other groups in the past, and I came to the conclusion that the model itself, while talking about fraud, could also apply to other sorts of wrongdoing, misconduct, even harassment and violence, in my view. So the way the fraud triangle works, and it was created by a sociologist and criminologist named Donald Cressy, mentioned in a specific book at the bottom. And the concept here is a trusted person becomes a trusted violator when there's a pressure or something happening in their life. There's the opportunity to take advantage of something to alleviate that pressure. And then there's a rationalization that takes place after the fact as to why they did it and why they still can be trusted. Pressure, so opportunity, pressure, rationalization. So I'll take this to the next slide here. Okay, and you see a different slide now, Crystal, Don, and Andrea? Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so it's quite an interesting thing. So the pressure. Pressure is something that somebody's feeling or experiencing, or sometimes it can be an incident as well. So in our current world, you've got COVID-19 pandemic and all the anxiety and stress and other sorts of things it's causing. There's also great opportunities with it, but it's causing a lot of grief. Could be things like medical bills, expensive tastes, addiction, high personal debt, greed, or entitlement. There could even be predisposing personality disorders like I'm entitled to this or whatnot. So that, that's the pressure. Or sometimes I describe it as an incident. My boss, made me feel stupid or belittled me or didn't recognize me or whatnot. The opportunity, the next piece is maybe there are a lack of controls, monitoring, or oversight, that you can move undetected and your position gives you access and authority. So you use the example of I'm working in a restaurant and I'm under this COVID-19 world and I got some financial pressures here. And guess what? I'm the only one in the restaurant right now. And while we're doing a lot of electronic transactions, there's some cash in the cash drawer. I need 80 bucks for the weekend. I need to buy groceries, whatever. Opportunities there. I've got access. Nobody's watching me. Rationalization at the end. I don't care. I needed the money. It's not hurting anyone. The boss can afford it. I'll pay it back, or I've earned it. And I find this fascinating. And I've also tried to apply it to situations of misconduct, wrongdoing, harassment, violence, etc., in the workplace that I've seen, in my past life before starting this new business. And it sort of works. And what I'll tell you is, starting with an incident. So I was talking to a Barhaven business owner recently, and I won't give you the details on who he is or what his business is, but I'm going to tell you that it's in the restaurant world, or providing food to clients who come in the door. And we were talking about fraud, and I was asking him, what are his worries or concerns with respect to fraud, and he said, you know what, Ken, honestly, I don't really even have time to think about it or look at it. I'm just not sure. And so we talked about the financial aspect of it, and I threw this other sort of concept out of them. And it's more of a corruption, or not even corruption, but it's. I'll tell you what the scenario is. So we came up with a scenario of this business owner, insults me. I'm his employee for I feel insulted, or maybe I feel entitled, or I'm not getting as much money as my colleagues, or whatever. The opportunity there is I'm ticked off. That's my motive and rationale. I'm really ticked off with this guy. My opportunity is I get to work in the kitchen today. So I'm going to take a bottle of bleach or whatever. I'm going to spoil up a batch of what we're making. I'm going to make sure nobody gets hurt. So I'm going to say, holy crap, look at this. This is bad. We're going to throw away a whole bunch of raw material, a bunch of product. But I'm going to stick it to him. And my rationalization is, you know what? He pissed me off. He can afford it. He drives the big car. So you know what? I'm happy I did it. So it's a funny sort of example, but I found when I look at past cases, as I said, of things that I've seen in my previous workplaces, you can apply it a lot of times to things that have gone on. I'm going to move us over to another concept here called insider threat. Before doing so, though, I'm just curious if there's anyone that has any questions or comments with respect to what I just talked about. Okay, well, I will continue going here. And just from a timing perspective, we're probably about maybe 10, 15 minutes before wrapping up. Okay, so here I'm going to talk about now insider threat and corruption. And it's funny, I think some business owners probably don't necessarily look at these terms and think that maybe there's risks for them. And it's kind of a hard concept to apply in some cases. So I've got a definition here from Public Safety Canada, and again, there's many definitions of insider threat, and a lot of them are information technology related, but essentially it's any person with authorized access who causes harm, either intentionally or not, to the assets of an organization. It could be an employee who it could be an employee who has the proprietary recipe to make something in a particular Barhaven restaurant, and they lose it. They lose it outside. Someone else picks it up, or they sell it or give it to somebody, or somebody who sells or gives credit card information from the business's clients, or loses it outside. They've been trusted to go to the bank or whatnot, and they've dropped the envelope or dropped the package, whatever. So sometimes it's the malicious people who are trying to do things, and sometimes it's just the innocent person who made a mistake. And I remember a situation in a former employer where somebody had lost a USB key in a taxi. And on that USB key was very sensitive client information. And my team, went to taxi companies and Starbucks restaurants and all these places in Ottawa to try and find it. It was very, important information, and we eventually found it. And what was comical about it as well is, I think we found about 7 or 8 other USB keys belonging to government departments and everything else that had been left or lost or dropped or whatnot. So it's kind of interesting. So, and this insider threat thing is something that I had actually helped prepare, helped the government of Canada prepare a number of years ago in response to. So you think back to WikiLeaks, you think back to Edward Snowden, you think back to Canadian naval officer Jeffrey Delisle, who sold information to the Russian embassy. And it takes you to, and the insider threat thing was to identify a number of ways to make sure that these things didn't happen. Malicious acts or careless acts that cause problems for a business or for government. And so the risk factors are things that we talked about under the fraud triangle. So personal crisis triggers an action. We're in this COVID-19 world, I can't pay the bills or whatever. I'm stressed, I can't see my family. Oftentimes with these things, it's a little bit different in this virtual world, but oftentimes with these sort of insider threat cases, when we've looked at past, examples in the FBI and other places is, and even in my own employer, there were triggers, there were signs that people were exhibiting in the workplace that their colleagues saw but didn't recognize what they were, because you can't just look at one little incident and say, aha, that person is going to steal from the organization. But kind of the post-mortem on these things, you see, oh yeah, you know what? We could have seen that, possibly seen that coming. And that's then the opportunity for things like employee assistance programs or whatever, mental health, to make sure you get the person back on track before they do something that they can't get out of. In Jeffrey Delisle's case, his world fell apart. And so what he essentially did is he did what he described as committing career suicide. He walked into the Russian embassy here in Ottawa and he said, I have information to sell to you. And he sold information to the Russians until he was eventually arrested, incarcerated, convicted and incarcerated. There's a section here, bullets here, on predisposing personality traits. And oftentimes when I talk about these sorts of things as, risk factors or potential indicators, I get some chuckles because some people say, oh yeah, I work for that guy who has those traits, or I know that person or whatever. So, again, postmortems on famous cases of spies or people have been corrupted and, steal whatnot. Narcissistic traits, so going back to the fraud triangle as well. Self-centered, entitled, undervalued. My organization doesn't appreciate what I do for them. Arrogant, inflated sense of self-worth. Antisocial traits, people who, reject the rules of society, they don't apply to me, lack resource, manipulative. So as I describe these things, I'm not saying business owners, you now need to be able to figure out all these psychological or predisposing, traits that your employees are exhibiting. I'm just telling you, sharing with you some of the things that are causing people to cross a line. And I would say for you as business owners in this new world, right now, risks are there. Risks were always there, but risks are there now. There's increased stressors, and just be mindful that there's things that you hopefully can do to prevent these things. I'm going to talk to you about this is what 2 techniques that I'll say the bad guys do that criminal organizations do to corrupt an employee. And I used to do this exercise where I worked previously, where I would take a look at a particular person's job function in an organization and just see if I could figure out how they could be valuable to organized crime, as an example, or not even organized crime. And it doesn't really take a lot of effort to really come up with the people of what threat somebody poses. So it could be somebody's administrative assistant or executive assistant who has all the information that the big boss has, or someone who's responsible for taking care of the banking for the business, or who knows what, or someone who's holding that proprietary recipe if it exists. So just to share with you, because I think these things are always kind of fun, the techniques that the bad guys use, and it's also what the good guys use when they're trying to flip an informant, cultivation and elicitation techniques, and really what they are is cultivation is building a relationship with an individual with the intent of eventually, trying to get them to cross the line and do something for you. So befriend somebody who works in this particular organization who has access to the cash register. build this relationship with them, and really, maybe even shower them with gifts or whatnot. And then ask them to do something real simple for you. Hey, could you give me this information, or could you let me come in late and buy something or whatnot, and cause them to cross a line, to the point where the bad guy then says next time, okay, can you give me the credit card information? Well, no, I can't. Well, listen, you already let me in to do whatever else it was previously. You really have no choice. So you end up giving the credit card information. Or elicitation is one where all these very innocuous sort of conversations take place to try to figure out, this Ken McCarthy guy and how you can corrupt him. So he's a sports fan, Ottawa Senators fan, does he like this, that? And eventually you've got somebody who comes up to him and starts talking about the sports and that sort of stuff, and kind of gets them comfortable with you. So it's a neat sort of thing that the spies use. And I always give this silly example of, let's imagine I'm a Toronto Maple Leaf fan and I like tall blonde women with lots of tattoos and piercings. And I'm in possession of some important piece of information from my employer. Maybe it's specifications for the design or something. And I'm in another city, and lo and behold, what happens is a tall blonde woman wearing a Toronto Maple Leaf t-shirt with tattoos and piercings sits right beside me. Wow, what a coincidence that is. And starts chatting me up. So it's a silly sort of example, but it's a real world example as well, and just some of the things that people can do. And be mindful that everybody has some information that's of value or importance to someone else. And by sharing this with you, it's not to make you think that, oh my God, we have greater risks now. Risks exist previously, they certainly are enhanced, but it's just to give you an awareness as well. And I go back to the one small business owner who said he really didn't have the opportunity or time to think of fraud. And I totally get that. He's trying to do what he needs to do on a day-to-day business, and trying to invest time and effort around these other things. It can be difficult. Okay, so I just showed you in advance of my screen there. So I'm going to get out of here for a second. Okay, so just a quick pause here. Anybody have any questions or comments, reactions after that last little bit there? Okay. All right, so I'm going to take you, and I gave you an advance look at the slide. I'm going to take you to just some advice that I have on what we as business leaders can be doing right now. So I'll start with what I think business leaders should not be doing right now, okay? So it's been 7 weeks and 1 day since the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a pandemic. We saw it coming, but that was the official announcement that day. So many of us, I know my kids, in fact, started working from home like Monday, the 16th of March. So we're 7 weeks into this, right? Business leaders here, I don't think we can sit back and just believe nothing bad has happened in the past 7 weeks, okay? Just because COVID has occurred. We have workplaces that are no longer the traditional workplaces, but you still, in many cases, have employees interacting with one another. So there's a good possibility that things have happened. And remember, I'm talking about, we've got new stressors, increased stressors. This is a very difficult time. People are getting anxious and ornery over being stuck at home, staring at the colleagues' faces. Oftentimes hear another person say, oh, here's another Zoom call, another whatever. The risks existed before. With controls and guards down and increased stressors, the risks are greater. I don't think business owners, business leaders should be riding out the storm right now, doing nothing, praying for the best and saying, I'll deal with it later. There's an opportunity right now, and that's a theme that we've heard, Andrea, through the calls through the business improvement area, and also a number of calls that I've attended with one of our partner organizations, Rhapsody Strategies. And there's an opportunity here, while things are quieter, if they are quieter, to hit the reset button, as I'll describe it, to really think about how you change what you want to do moving forward. So here's what I'm thinking employers or business leaders should be doing right now. Something bad may have happened in the past 7 weeks. Maybe nothing bad has happened. You may never know. Someone may decide, you know what, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. Just chalk it up to COVID stress and move forward, even if they've been offended or belittled, humiliated, harassed by somebody, right? So my first piece of advice is we should be, as business leaders, talking to our employees now. Not that you weren't doing it before, but it's an opportunity to let them know what you're expecting of them, or remind them what you're expecting of them and what they expect from you. And here I'm talking about workplace conduct, no harassment, no bullying, certainly none of the other, fraud and wrongdoing as well, but what you're expecting of them in this environment. Like I said, chances are many of us walked into this without a real concrete plan. There probably weren't working at home policies in place, and it's not the Wild West, but there's different ways of doing business now. So take the time, talk to them, let them know what you're expecting of them. So I mentioned earlier about hitting the reset button. So we've heard some great examples in a number of these calls on business leaders who are doing, business differently. You have no choice, you have to do it differently. And I go back to what I said at the earlier part of the conversation, Andrea, where I heard someone recently talking about how they're making money now, when a number of weeks ago, and it's not that long ago, it was all doom and gloom, and understandably so. So, people are doing great things, but I'm saying, now is a good time to hit the reset button on your business foundation. And so there's a wise gentleman that many of you know named Rob Dale. He's with Rhapsody Strategies. And he and I had a chat the other day on, your business values. And in some cases, your business values are values that someone corporately above you put on you. But if you have the luxury of, being a small business owner, or if it's even luxurious in this day and age, or at least being able to influence, Rob and I were talking about, your own personal values really need to inform what your business values are. And what you can, and with this, so if you take a moment to, hit that reset button and really think and really make sure that your business values are grounded in your own personal values, and that should drive everything that you do. There's an opportunity to hit that reset button on the expected standards of conduct for your employees and for yourself as well. These are really important foundational elements. Third point I want to make is maybe something has happened in the past 7 weeks. Maybe not. Maybe you have a conversation with your employees to tell them what you expect of them, and be careful what you wish for. All of a sudden, you have disclosures made to you after the fact that, yes, Ken offended me during a call last week or whatnot. You need to acknowledge any and all issues that have arisen between staff working remotely or virtually in this day and age, or any other time really. Maybe you can't take action to actually resolve it right now, but you know what? Think of yourself, you've been on one of these calls with your colleagues, someone says something that's tremendously offensive to you, you don't want to make a big deal. I'm going to guess that it's eating away at you. I'm going to guess that you're dreading that next call and that next interaction. And I've heard of situations where even managers have been on these calls and there's the opportunity to intervene and they haven't. So you've got somebody now holding on to something that's going to be eating away at them. You got to take action to prevent the further damage. So even if it's just saying, Ken, I heard what you had to say. This is a really big deal to me. I'm going to make sure to protect you right now while I can. And that could be, not having these calls or doing things differently. And then commit to resolving them promptly. And maybe promptly is only after, we're able to do real face-to-face things. You don't know, but don't let it fester. You got to give your people an assurance that, okay, yeah, you know what, this is serious. I told you this is serious. You disclosed this to me. This is what I can do now, but I'm not going to let it go. Don't make promises that you're going to fire somebody else because you don't know the whole story there. But the point I want to make is when you get back into the new normal, or when you enter the new normal, you sure don't want to be dragging this anchor behind you of all these employee relations issues relating to harassment or violence in the workplace or fraud or wrongdoing. You're going to be trying to get on your feet anyways. And it's going to be tough. You certainly don't want to do this. And people are people. Sometimes people cross a line, sometimes maliciously, sometimes not. Things can be resolved at early stages if you acknowledge that they actually happened and don't just pretend and hope that they didn't happen. I'm going to give you just some formality and in terms of closing thoughts, and if there's conversation after this within the group, I can certainly provide some post-closing thoughts. But as business leaders, you have a lot on your plate right now. There's a lot of stressors, there's lots of opportunities, and if you're regularly attending these sorts of calls, you're hearing lots of really smart people. I'm not talking about myself here. You hear some really smart people telling you that this is a time to invest in revisiting or reinventing yourself, in assessing whether you should be doing certain type of business moving forward. Anyways, it's you got a lot on your plates, whether you're reinventing yourself or surviving. When you get going again, whatever form you may look like, as I said, you don't want to have that anchor that you're dragging behind you that's preventing you from moving forward. Take a serious look. I'm going to say, take a serious look right now at the risks that you're facing, what you can control and what you can influence and what you need to do. So this presentation or this talk that I gave you today, I've got it in a PowerPoint format that, as you've seen, that I will gladly, Andrea, give to your group if you wish to post it. I'm also going to have a template in there, and it's just a really simple risk profile is what it is. It's a good exercise. It's you know, an exercise where you as a business leader, just, you make a statement. I have a risk that, or there is a risk of that. And, I'll give you an example that employees may engage in workplace harassment. You take a look at what controls are already in place. It could be legislation, could be policies. Maybe you've done training. There's this whole concept of I can do the minimum effort to make sure I comply with what the government tells me to do. And on the Rhapsody call yesterday, Trevor Munven said, complying never leads a person to greatness. So compliance is just meeting the bare minimum. What can you do to kind of go above and beyond that? And apart from just, I've got the posters up about harassment, is what do you really need to do? And then you look at what controls are in place, and then look to see if there's some little thing you can do to, to raise the bar there. So Andrea, that's the end of the formality, if I can call it that, of what I wanted to talk about. I'm happy to hear comments, questions, explore things as well.
Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely open up to comments or any kind of discussion, or maybe sharing of any experiences from calls that some of our participants have been on. I'll definitely make sure, so Crystal will upload the video recording of the webinar to our website, as well as that assessment template and your PowerPoint deck. If you could provide us with those, Ken, that'd be appreciated.
Yes.
I think definitely from my standpoint, your comment about insurance, and whoever brought that up, that was very insightful.
Yes, I think it's Judy from Position, I think. Yeah.
Probably something that a lot of people haven't even thought of. Does my current policy as a business owner protect me with conducting business in this fashion? Probably not. Maybe it's broad reaching, but maybe it doesn't. And also, I had in the chat said not only this, but if you've changed your business delivery model at all, like if you're now doing curbside pickup, if you're now doing delivery and you weren't doing those things before, you might also want to take a look at your insurance policy and make sure that you're covered in those ways as well.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, because we have a board of managers and staff, I'll definitely take a review of our own code of conduct that everybody has to sign when they onboard. So just to make sure that it's up to date and it's actually reflecting this new way of operating. So thanks for bringing those points up. Just going to scan the chat quickly before we close off the call. I know some people will have to drop off because it's after 1. The Chapmans, we will be taking these points back to the management team. Thank you from our chair, Jason McDonald, who was also on the call today. Great food for thought. Moody from, let me see. Yeah, okay, Moody, great points and awesome presentation. Can the video be shared? So yes, Moody, I'm going to, Crystal will be posting a copy of this webinar to our website. So you'll definitely be able to access and share it with Janet and the team. And precision gymnastics, looking forward to seeing the risk assessment template. So again, we'll include that on the website. Right. So is there anything anybody else wanted to share before we end? Nope. Okay, well, I hope to see many of you on Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. We have our weekly open call for local businesses, which are definitely growing in popularity. This week in particular, yesterday's discussion was really, really great. A lot of new information is shared every week, so I strongly encourage any of you that haven't joined us before to do so. It'll be our 6th week of hosting the weekly calls at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. The summary from yesterday's discussion will also be available on our website later today. And then next Tuesday, we have another webinar, which is talking about creating a safe workflow for your business upon reopening, and in particular focusing on personal service industry businesses like electrolysis and massage therapists and spa providers, hair salons, that sort of thing, where you're sort of in someone's close personal space, and what you might have to do to prepare for your reopening. So thanks everybody, and I think we'll end there. Have a great day, and happy almost weekend. Bye.
Thanks, bye everyone.